What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Yes, this is going to be a very easy video for you to follow. I've been getting this question a lot. Should I get Constellation 2 Xilonen or should I get her weapon? Now, I'm going to let you know straight out there, especially before we get the comments down below. You can put it down there anyway, right? Like, comment, subscribe. It's not really the fairest question because they did update the epitomized path not too long ago. If you're a returning player, you really only lose one 50-50 on the weapon banner now. You get one fate point when you get the weapon that you don't want. And then after you have that fate point, you're guaranteed to get the weapon that you want. So it's pretty much the old equivalent of a character pull on a event rate up banner. Now, it's not really a 50-50 though on the character banner because it also has been updated. If you don't know that it has been updated, and it includes this new little buff here called the Capturing Radiance trigger. Basically, if you're not on your guaranteed event character, if you're on what you would think is the original 50-50, right? You have the chance to trigger this Capturing Radiance. Now, what this really does, it doesn't describe the percentage odds of you triggering the Capturing Radiance event, but the consolidated probability is around 55% that it will be the guaranteed character on the banner. What does this mean for you? Well, if you're on your guaranteed, you're going to get Xilonen. If you're on your 50-50, it's not really a 50-50 anymore. It's really like a 55-45 as far as what it says here in the details of the banner itself. So it's going to cost you a little bit more primo gems, or maybe you need to get a little bit more lucky to get Constellation 2 compared to her weapon. But if that's what you want to know, should I invest a little bit more primo gems, disregard the weapon and get the Constellation 2? We're going to touch on that. Now, the big thing about the Peak Patrol song here for you, what are you gaining from this, right? What are you doing with the Peak Patrol song? So there's a couple of stats that you want on your Xilonen: energy recharge a little bit. We covered that in our build guide. Go check that one out. 4-year access to your elemental burst for healing in the support form. In fact, outside of Notlon, as soon as you fill up your Night Soul meter, you are going to be ejected out of your Night Soul form, and you need to swap out because that's what triggers your source samples and is going to trigger the resistance for you there. So, with the other thing though that we have here is the damage bonus, 25.6%, basically for everyone in your party, as long as you can reach 3,000 defense on your Xilonen, which is going to be a very easy thing to do. I think I'm around like 2.4, 2.5k, and I don't have a defense weapon on. So if you have access to this weapon, it's going to be very easy to hit that 3,000 defense there. So what is the trade-off between having access to the Peak Patrol song and access to the Constellation 2? There's going to be two parts to this. Let's touch on this real quick for you. If you go ahead and you look at Xilonen as a character, and we'll go over her constellations. The main thing, you're going to have access to that bonus healing, and you're going to have access to that damage percent bonus of 25%. The Constellation 2 is going to be a little bit different. You're not going to get 25% or more damage bonus for every element in the game. Now, if you're using Xilonen in something like we've been using with like Xilonen Noelle, like 2 Hydro characters or 2 other characters, so you guarantee to shred Geo resistance for everyone in your party, and you do have another Geo character that you want a damage bonus up, you're going to get 50% Geo damage bonus straight up. So that's just going to be better than the Peak Patrol song if you're trying to buff up someone like, I don't know, Arataki Ito or Noelle, or maybe you have her in a Navia team. The C2 is going to give you more damage buff for those Geo carries. So the Constellation 2 is going to be better there. The other ones though, Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, and Electro, these are going to be a little bit different. Now, Pyro and Hydro are the two that we want to talk about because you can't really compare 25% damage bonus and then attack 45% and HP 45% and say that they're always going to be better in certain circumstances. Not just how it works. In a lot of circumstances though, especially in 2024 in Genshin Impact, there are a ton of characters that offer up big damage percent bonuses, like Farina or Yelan, right, for instance, or maybe like Kazuha in your party. And the more damage percent bonus that you have on your characters, it's not really diminishing returns, but there's like diminishing gains on getting more damage bonus. If you're already at 150% damage bonus, going up to 175% damage bonus isn't going to give you 25% more damage. It's not how it works. A lot of the times, adding more attack or more HP will actually give you more damage than 25% damage bonus. So Pyro and Hydro, a lot of the times, the Pyro one is probably the worst one here. 45% attack for DPS attack scaling Pyro characters. This is going to be around like 400, 500 more attack, because a lot of weapons that if you're using a 5-star weapon have around, 500, 600 base attack in some scenarios, maybe a little bit lower like the Red Horn Stone Thresher, or if you're using like an actual attack scaling weapon, you have like 608. And then most characters base attacks, if they're a DPS scaling character, can vary. If you look at someone like Yulha here, you'll see that my base attack, right, 950. Well, 950, a lot of that is coming from the Unforged. If we just take this off and put on like a garbage weapon, like this bell, you will see that our main stat here is very low, right? 384 attack. So a lot of the times this damage bonus, or this attack up, I should say, for pyro characters, it's the equivalent of adding like 500-ish or so attack, depending on which character and weapons that you're using, which is still very good. It's going to be weaker in some teams than the damage percent bonuses, but stronger in some teams if you already have Farina, Xilonen, right? Than a couple of pyro characters. Now the Hydra one is going to be very big because there's not really a lot of ways. I was going to say almost no ways, maybe no ways at all, to boost up how characters max HPs in a very distinct way like you can here. 45% max HP for a lot of characters is a pretty big deal. As you see, the base stats for characters max HP is pretty big. My base stat for Farina, for instance, is 15,000. The base stat for an HP scaler is like 14.4 for Xilonen, right? We have characters like Nivelette as well, who also scale very well off of HP percent damage multipliers. So this Constellation 2 here is pretty significant, and a lot of those characters, like we just talked about, Xilonen and Farina, already add a ton of damage percent bonuses for different characters, either themselves or other people in your party. So this Hydro damage Constellation 2 bonus is very strong. Cryo crit damage bonus, very good. Cryo as an element is suffering and maybe is probably the worst element in Genshin Impact right now. I know, throw the tomatoes at me, it's fine, but it's pretty good. A lot of the times you're going to be capping out your crit damage on your cryo characters because you have them in a freeze team or something of that nature. Eula not so much, but someone like Ganyu, you can build up for some pretty hefty crit damage, and adding 60% more there. It's very similar to adding a bunch of elemental burst damage or just elemental damage to characters who have a ton of elemental damage already. So it's very similar to the R1 weapon for cryo characters. The big one here though, and this is the one that I'm really interested in, and it's primarily for one character, the Constellation 2 for Electro characters. Now, restore 25 energy, reduce the burst cooldown by 6 seconds. There's some pretty awesome things you can do with the C2 for Electro characters and Electro teams. Now, the big one I'm going to get to, but someone as innocuous as, right, Keqing, right? You go ahead and you look at her burst. You're like, oh, dude, it's a 12-second cooldown. You can have the cooldown of Keqing's elemental burst. And this is a very large multiplier, and you do a lot of cool things with this. This is a lot of damage. This is more than 25% elemental damage bonus. This is way more than that, because you're basically, as far as DPS is concerned, doubling the amount of elemental burst you can do with the Keqing per fight. On top of that, you don't have to worry about getting the extra energy to make up for the fact that you have 6 less seconds to get that energy back for your burst, because it gives you 25 energy. This is absolutely insane for characters like Keqing. And there's another character that I think many fans out there will have a very solid place for, and this is Raiden Shogun. Now, Raiden Shogun, very strong, even Hyper Raiden teams, incredibly powerful still. Imagine taking a Hyper Raiden Shogun squad. You take this 18-second cooldown and you take it to 12 seconds. You're going to be on field for about 7 seconds. So, your 11-second downtime is reduced to 5-second downtime. You're going to have basically 5 seconds, maybe 4, depending on swapping around in elemental burst animations for Raiden and everyone else. 3.5 seconds to pop out everyone's elemental bursts, do damage with Raiden Shogun, and go back in immediately. There's not going to be any real downtime. You're also going to give your Raiden Shogun 25 energy back to help yourselves out there. That's going to be insane for Hyper Raiden teams, and the amount of damage percent bonus you'd gain in comparison to having just the Peak Patrol song in a Hyper Raiden team if you're going to be using Xilonen. And let me tell you, it's really, really good. I have a video on that soon. It's phenomenal. It's insane. It's one of the best things that I think you can do in Genshin Impact. And I don't think I've seen a lot of people talking about that quite yet. Maybe people need to experiment more, because on paper, you look at it, you're like, oh, reduce my burst cooldown. Not that big of a deal. It's insane. And it gets absolutely more insane if you are a big Hyper Raiden fan and you gain access to her Constellation 6. I know I don't have it yet either, but you can get 5-second cooldown reduction off of everyone else's elemental bursts in your party. This would be overkill if you're using it with the Keqing. If you have a C6 Raiden Shogun and you have access to Keqing in your party and you have C2 of our girl, yes, you'd have a 1 second cooldown on your Kaching's Elemental Burst, which technically you're not going to be able to make use of that because you're going to be inside your Raiden Shogun Elemental Burst still. But you can do cool things with Kujo Sara popping off her Elemental Burst continuously, right, between the two of them. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do even without Constellation 6 on Raiden Shogun. Really, it's the Constellation 2 of Xilonen that enables Hyper Carry Raiden to just be even better than she was before, which is chef kiss phenomenal there. Now, there's going to be a couple other things we need to talk about here. Now, Constellation 1 is something that you do gain access to going up to Constellation 2. So what does the Constellation 1 actually do for you? In essence, this big chunk up here, right, where your Night Soul Blessing state decreases, slower, and your point limit is extended by 45%. Basically, this is just going to increase your movement while you're using your Night Soul form. That's really all it's going to do. It's going to help you out in the overworld exploration, maybe help you move from one side of the abyss floor to the other when you're in that little room. That's basically all that's going to do. But the big one here is something that also is very slept on, is that while her source samples are active, which they're always going to be active in her support form, you get interruption resistance for your active character, which is insane because a lot of the time Xilonen's taking up that defensive slot in your team. She's going to be your buffer, your debuffer, but also your healer. And to be super slot efficient, you're probably not going to run her with a shielder. Think of someone like a Nivelette, right? A Nivelette squad with Xilonen, you've seen that team running around. There's not really a shielder there for Nivelette. And if you don't have a Constellation 1 for Nivelette, you can get smacked around out of your charged attack. If you have Constellation 1, though, on your way to Constellation 2, your Nivelette's not going to be able to get slapped around anymore because you have this interruption resistance, and then your C2, you're going to get max HP 45% and buff that up as well. There's also one other caveat we need to talk about too, because to be truly fair, like we talked about, it's not the same Primogem equivalent, but you're also able to use a different weapon. You don't have the Peak Patrol Song because you went for Constellation 2. And so not only are you gaining the benefits of the Constellation 2, but you're going to be gaining the benefits of whatever weapon that you decide to use, right? You could be C2 and not have the weapon and then use something like the Favonius Sword, and now you have damage bonus for your team or whatever the Constellation is giving you for your elemental makeup for your party. For instance, for me, for Geo, my Hydro team, if I was Constellation 2, I'd get Geo damage bonus, max HP damage bonus at the trade-off of having a little bit less healing and a little bit less of that free damage percent bonus, that 25% from Peak Patrol Song. But on top of that, I'd also be able to wear Favonius in Elemental Battery, my team as well, and help out with that. Or you could go ahead and say, maybe use the Cinnabar Spindle or the Flute of that Spatzel, which is the new crafted weapon, to gain access to defense percent. So you'll be able to make up for the fact that you have increased healing from your 4-star defense percent weapon, which is what you'd get as the main stat from your Peak Patrol Song anyway. And then instead of that 25% damage bonus from the Peak Patrol Song, you'd have those Constellation 2 buffs in the interruption resistance, which is very, very strong. And on top of that, there is one other weapon that you may have laying around that I don't have on this account, so I can't showcase it to you right away. But check this out. Maybe you want the best of both worlds. If you have this weapon, I would suggest that you check it out. Now, we're going to be going to Sword of 5-star weapons, and this one's going to look a little strange to you, but the Freedom Sworn is Kazuha's weapon, has Elemental Mastery on it, and it also is going to give a damage percent bonus and an attack percent bonus as well from the refinement ability. So if you have the Freedom Sworn, you can already get a damage percent bonus and an attack percent bonus for your party, being able to buff up their damage. Instead of going for Peak Patrol Song, you can then go for Constellation 2, spend a little bit more Primogems, and buff up their damage in some sort of form as well. And I hear you say, Josh, that doesn't help me. I just need a definitive answer. Here's your definitive answer. If you're willing to spend a little bit more Primogems, right? Pull for that extra 50-50, right? Maybe you get a little bit lucky, you gain access to her early. Having access to Constellation 1 and Constellation 2, I think will bring a higher value to your account than just having her weapon. Her weapon is mainly only kind of good on her and maybe like support Albedo, which is pretty strong. But having access to these buffs in the interruption resistance makes her an extremely flexible character. You're going to have access to the different weapons in the game to increase your healing, or use something like Favonius, like we talked about, to increase energy regen for your team. Or maybe you have Kazuha's weapon and you can go all out on the damage percent bonus there. Instead of just gaining access to the weapon and just being like, yeah, 25% damage bonus for everyone. A lot of these at the end of the day, the pyro buff, the hydro buff, the cryo buff, these are going to be around a 25-ish% equivalency of elemental damage bonus. Sometimes way higher, like the Electro and Geo ones. Sometimes a little bit lower, like maybe if you're using her in a Hu Tao team and Hu Tao doesn't have the highest base attack and the highest attack weapon in the game. It's going to be a little bit lower there. Although, to be honest with you, Hu Tao probably gets a ton of damage bonus in her teams now, so maybe it's about equivalent. But that's going to be my answer. If you want to spend the gems, I think it's going to be a big boon to your account. And one last thing, if she does get reran and you're already at Constellation 2 and you're like, oh, what should I do? Then you'll have the next question. Should I go for Constellation 3 and 4, or should I go for the weapon again? And maybe we'll answer that one later, but Constellation 3 and 4 real quick, right? Your Hall Scratch, that's going to be resistance penetration on the C3. This will take it up to talent level 13, which is 45% res pen, which makes it better than Viridescent and Venerset. That's more resistance shred than we have access to even from someone like Kazuha. And then the C4 is going to give you some sort of like, think of it like a Shenhe Quill effect or like a Yunjin effect as well. And this is going to allow you to add damage multiplier bonuses to everyone in your party's attacks. This is very hard to say just how strong it's going to be, because just like Shenhe, it goes on everyone. Everyone gets to use it 6 times and it's gone. But it's very powerful, and that's something that you can go for and use as well, because you'll be getting all these damage percent bonuses, all these res shred bonuses, and then 6 hits, you're going to get a bonus multiplier basically that's going to factor in your driver, whoever is currently doing the damage, their crit chance, their crit damage, their damage percent bonus up, and you're going to get a multiplier, basically the equivalent of 65% of Xilonen's defense added onto that character's multiplier. So very strong, just like with Shenhe's Quills, except you're not locked to using it on Cryo. This can be used for literally all of your party members, and there's some cool things you can do there. Hopefully this cleaned it up for you guys. Let me know what you thought about it down below. We're not doing that many edits today in this video. I am gonna have a Noelle Xilonen video. I'm gonna have a Raiden Shogun Xilonen video, and I'm gonna have a Hu Tao Xilonen video. They're all very good. I like them a ton, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Did that rhyme? I rhymed.